my name is Jess and welcome to my channel, Have a Book at This. Today I am filming for you a video which I am super excited about, and that is my top 10 reads of 2015. 2015 is almost over and I have read so many excellent books this year and it was really hard to get it down to just 10. Initially I was going to do the top 15 of 2015, but that would take a really long time to edit, and all I really want to do right now is just sort of sit on the sofa and eat turkey leftovers. So we're doing the 10. Anyway, I have ranked them, so from like my least favourite of the favourites being number 10 and my most favourite of the favourites being number 1. So let's just get in there with the books in 10th place, which is the Lunar Chronicles by Marissa, Meyer. And of those I've read Cinder, Scarlet and Cress, and I believe that Winter has just came out, so I need to get to that one too. So the Lunar Chronicles are essentially science fiction fairy tale retellings, and each book focuses on a different fairy tale to retell. So Cinder is obviously Cinderella, Scarlet is Little Red Riding Hood, Cress is Rapunzel. I was actually really hesitant to read this series because I'm not a massive sci-fi fan. With the exception of like Star Wars, I don't get it. It's not something I'm really fond of. And you know, the Lunar Chronicles is definitely in there with science fiction. I mean, within the first few pages of Cinder, you find out that Cinderella is a cyborg. But it's so brilliantly written, and Marissa Meyer handles these retellings so well. The plot threads are so intricate because with each book, you're just adding to the amount of characters, to the extent where I think by the end of Cress there were like 6 or 7 POV characters, and the way that their stories interconnected and all the little bits of fairy tale were kind of like interspersed in there was so entertaining to read. The sense of humour is absolutely brilliant in them as well. Thorn, Captain Thorn, who appears in book 2, is like my favourite character of the series. What's really excellent about the series as well is that it just gets better with every book and every new plot thread introduced, and I can't wait to read Winter because I think that if it carries on in that pattern, it's going to be the most amazing of the 3. So read those. Coming in at 9th place is a book that I read really recently, and it is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Attwood. So The Handmaid's Tale is an adult dystopia book, and it's set in a future version of America. So essentially in this society, women have no rights, and the women that are still fertile are picked to be a handmaid. Birth rate in America at this point is falling, and the role of these handmaids is to be impregnated and to have a child and to give that child up to the commander and the wife. This book was unbelievably heartbreaking and so harrowing because the way that it is told is, it's like Offred is speaking to you, and Offred isn't actually her real name. The way they do it is they take the name of the commander and they put Ob in front of it. So the commander's called Fred and she is like Fred's possession in this world, so it's of Fred, and that's how she's known in the book. The way that it's told is, it's like she is talking to you, and you feel the sense of urgency and you feel her fear, and you get a really strong sense of what this society is like, and it's a terrifying society. I couldn't put it down because all I wanted to find out was that she was okay. I don't really read that much adult fiction. I've kind of been foraying into it a little, and this was one of the first adult books that I read, and specifically one of the first adult science fiction-y dystopias I read, and it was absolutely amazing, and it's actually sort of ranked on one of my favourites lists at the moment, so I definitely recommend you picking that up. Coming in at 8th place is a book that I took a really long time to read because it's been out for years, and it is Daughter of Smoke and Bone. The plot of this is a really hard one to explain, and I actually think it's better if you go into it knowing as little as possible. In the most basic sense, it's about a girl called Carew who works for a chimera called Brimstone, and Brimstone owns this shop where people bring him all different sorts of teeth, human teeth and animal teeth, and these teeth can be converted into wishes. And Carew is really caught between two worlds because she doesn't feel as if she can be fully involved in the human world, but at the same time Brimstone is really secretive and doesn't want her to be immersed in the chimera's world. Laini Taylor's writing is some of the most beautiful writing I've ever read. She just knows how to paint a picture in your head, and she's got such an excellent command of language. It's high fantasy, but it's set partially in our world and it's set in Prague, and the way that she just sort of like evokes all of these settings is amazing. And it's so unusual as well. I have never read fantasy that handles the sort of characters and aspects of fantasy the way that she does, and in such a new and refreshing way. In 7th place we have the first book in the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson, and that is The Final Empire. So I'm sure you've had the magic system of Mistborn explained to you 1,000 times, but Just to recap, a Mistborn is someone that can consume metals and burn those metals inside them to unleash different abilities. So I think there's one for good sight, there's one for speed. And the first book in this trilogy follows two characters. It follows a street urchin called Wein, and it follows a sort of like self-exiled nobleman called Heir, as they team up to try and pull off a magical heist to overthrow the Lord Ruler of the Final Empire. I love fantasy books, and what Brandon Sanderson does really amazingly is he writes the politics and he writes the strategy and planning in a way that doesn't bore you. So there were times when there were pages of dialogue, but he wrote so well that I was immersed in it the whole way through, even if it was just them going over a plan. And the world is so unique as well, and it's so fully realised, and the characters that populate that world are just perfect for it. He knows how to fit characters to worlds, to plot lines. He also has a really good grasp of like the sort of little human quirks in relationships, and the relationship between Wein and Heir was a really special one, and I felt like he pulled that off and wrote that really, really well, and it was just amazing. And I've got the other two books and I need to read the other two books, so I can't wait. In sixth place we have a historical fiction book, and that is Rose Under Fire by Elizabeth Wein. Rose Under Fire is a World War II novel, and it follows a young woman called Rose who is a pilot, and she accidentally flies into enemy's territory where she is sort of kidnapped and taken into Ravensbrück concentration camp, which is a concentration camp for women. And there are a lot of experiments going on in the women in Ravensbrück, and the women that are experimented on are known as rabbits, and all of the women in the camp really want these rabbits to get out of the concentration camp so the entire world can see the atrocities committed against them. This book is definitely a harrowing read, and there were times when I found it really hard to get through, not because it was boring, but just because it was kind of the things that they went through, and these were real things. Ravensbrück was a real place and the rabbits were real people. It was just atrocious, like what they had to deal with, and the way that it was handled and wrote about, just it was completely new to me and very interesting, but also very, very dark. The spirit between the women as well, and that sort of desperation and that hope that they will get out and the world will see what happened to them, is just, it's beautiful, but it's also heartbreaking. And Rose is such a young heroine. She is only 18 years old, so to read about a woman who is only a tiny bit older than I am going through all of these things just really made it resonate even more with me, I think. In fifth place we have another fantasy novel, and that is Queen of the Tearling by Erika Johansen. Queen of the Tearling is set in a future America, but the society of this future America is a society that's regressed to sort of like medieval times. So they have a monarchy, the manners are very different, the houses are very different, they don't really have technology at all. Queen of the Tearling follows a young princess called Glyn as she travels to the keep so she can be coronated and start to rule her kingdom, because she's been kept in hiding for several years to keep her safe. Again, this was a fantasy novel that really focused on politics, but it was written in such an entertaining and intriguing way, and I think the world really helped that. It was definitely an unusual world, and I'm not sure how necessary it was in a way to have it be that future society that had progressed, but it was still just really interesting, and it's part of what made me want to read on, is just to find out how the society came to be this way. Heir is a really endearing heroine, and while she could be really frustrating at times, I understood her choices and I understood why she made them, and I loved the relationship that she formed with her guard. It was just what I considered to be a really strong fantasy novel, and I need to read the next book in the series because I just need to find out what happens. In fourth place we have Heir of Fire by Sarah J Maas, which is the third book in the Throne of Glass series. I read both Heir of Fire and Queen of Shadows this year, but I think that Heir of Fire was definitely my favourite of the two, because the character growth and the introduction of all the new plot elements with the Fae were just so well written. You can see how Sarah J Maas has like progressed as a writer from the first book to the most recent book. Laini is such an intriguing heroine, and her character growth alone is just unbelievable. Sarah J Maas really knows how to take a character and how to develop them and how to handle their storyline, and it was so satisfying to read. It's going to be 6 books, which is excellent because I don't think that there are enough sort of like sprawling fantasy series in YA. There are a lot of trilogies, but not so many like long fantasy series, and I feel like Throne of Glass has the potential to be an amazing one. It already is an amazing one, and oh, I love it. And if you haven't read it, go read it. I mean, what are you doing? So now we are into my top 3, and in 3rd place we have Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. Carry On is based on the Simon Snow series, which is a fictional series introduced to us in Fangirl, where our main character, Kath, wrote fanfiction about it. But Carry On is Rainbow Rowell's own take on this world and on this fanfiction, and it's so good. So follow Simon Snow, who is a young wizard who attends the Watford School of Magics with his friend Penny and his roommate and arch nemesis, Baz. So Simon is a chosen one, so he's been chosen to defeat the insidious humdrum, who is essentially this world's Voldemort. And if that wasn't enough to concern Simon, when he shows up to Watford for his 7th year, Baz, his roommate, is missing. And unbeknownst to Simon, Baz is completely in love with him. I was really nervous about how Rainbow Rowell was going to pull this off, because honestly I wasn't that keen on the Simon and Baz fanfiction in Fangirl. I kind of felt it to be a bit boring and a bit stagnant. And I was also really worried that Carry On was going to read just like a terrible Harry Potter spoof. But it didn't. It was amazing. And what was amazing about it was that Rainbow Rowell has just this gift to make you become so invested in the characters just like instantly. And the magic system was also really interesting. It's entirely based on the power of words. So commonly used phrases or sayings can like have magic powers behind them, which was really interesting because I've never read anything like that before. The romance was handled so well and I was rooting for them so much. And honestly, I just thought it was an enjoyable, entertaining, fluffy read, and I absolutely loved it. So in 2nd place we have a classic novel that I read for the first time this year, and that is Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This follows a young orphan as she goes from youth to adulthood, and as she becomes employed by the very rich, mysterious Mr. Rochester. And it was Jane's voice and her character that made this book just so perfect for me. She was just such a relatable heroine, which I wasn't expecting. The plot was dark and it was gothic, and another thing that I really loved was the relationship between Mr. Rochester and Jane Eyre. You just sort of get the sense with them that they loved like the essence of each other's beings and the definition of an epic love story, and I was so invested in it from start to finish, and it's one of my favourite novels of all time now. And in 1st place is the Lumatere Chronicles by Melina, which is a young adult fantasy trilogy. So the first book in the series, Finnegan of the Rock, follows a young boy called Finnegan who is from a kingdom of Lumatere which faced tragedy years ago when its entire royal family was slaughtered and most of the remaining people exiled. Finnegan, however, believes that the heir to the throne and his childhood best friend Balthazar is still living, and along with Sir Topher, who's his ward, they decide to go on a quest with a young novice named Evangeline to try and find this lost prince and bring him home to his kingdom. This book is marketed as YA, but it doesn't read like YA at all because it has so many POV points from people of all different ages, and it's really dark and gritty and honest. It reads sort of like an old grim fairy tale, and the medieval setting, which I feel is overdone in a lot of other books, feels new and fresh here, and all the kingdoms have their really distinct feels. What Melina Marchetta handles expertly in every book she writes is character growth, and this series is definitely no exception. A lot of fantasy books I feel sacrifice character a little for plot, but this one doesn't. These books are 100% character driven, and the character arcs that you witness and that you see develop are so satisfying and brilliantly written. It made me laugh, it made me cry, it made me feel every emotion I think you can feel, and I would dare to say that it is my all-time favourite YA book series, or all-time favourite book series in general. So of course it was going to go on my favourites list of 2015 because it's just that amazing. So there you have it. Those were my top 10 books of 2015. I'm hoping for a reading year in 2016 which is just as good and where I discover many more amazing books. Let me know if there are any books that you read and enjoyed in 2015 that maybe I could read in 2016. But until then, have a really happy new year and goodbye.